Hi, everyone. Welcome for joining. We'll give it a few more seconds as people are trickling in, and we will get started very shortly. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Is your map a junk drawer? We have Alyssa from the Openprise side and Len from our partner CRMT. Alyssa will be co-speaking as well as moderating the session. So Alyssa, I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Thank you, Henry. And thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today. So today we are going to be talking about what happens when the modern marketing automation platform starts doing a lot more than it was really ever meant to do, and how teams can start separating out data orchestration from activation in a way that ultimately reduces operational debt and improves your agility. And really, in today's world, better prepares you all for what AI is actually going to require. So, before we get into it, quick round of introductions. I'm Alyssa Hewitt, Director of Customer Success at Openprise, and with me today is Len van Hoogenhuijze, the Chief Consultancy Officer of CRM Digital. Len, you want to say hey?
Hi, thanks for the introduction. So I'm Chief Consultancy Officer at CRMT Digital, and we are a marketing operations agency based in the UK. We serve a global roster of companies in the B2B space, and we specialize in solving complex problems around technology and data. Things like AI enablement, data orchestration, and governance, and go-to-market technology are all key parts of our offering, and we're very proud to be an open price partner, of course.
Awesome, thank you. And very quickly, before we get into the meat of our presentation today, just a very quick look at the agenda. So we are going to talk about the problem with today's marketing automation platform, junk drawer. We'll talk about what composable architecture means and how we decouple data from sort of the engagement layer, when a composable map is a good choice and when it isn't, the path toward being able to get to some type of composable architecture, and what kind of that migration entails, how to approach it, and then finally, how to mitigate risks so that you can ultimately reap the rewards of the transformation that you're making. So, a lot to cover today. We will get going. Okay. Now, before we actually get into composability, I do just want to set one expectation clearly, and that is that this is not an anti-marketing automation platform conversation. I come from the agency world myself. I got my start on Marketo specifically. I love marketing automation platforms. They gave me my career. A lot of teams are getting tremendous value from their marketing automation platform. So if your map is working well, you should keep it. We're not ripping out tools for sport here. And it's not an argument that every team suddenly needs a fully composable architecture. But I would argue that many teams would benefit from some level of composability, especially in the age of AI that we're in. So ultimately, what we're talking about today is separating data ops from activation where it makes sense to do that. And the goal, of course, is to reduce your operational debt and to make your stack agile as things continue to evolve in the RevOps space. So again, if your map is healthy, if it's well utilized, it's not really creating a lot of pain for you, that's great. You should keep it. This conversation is really for teams where the platform is underused, overburdened, taxed, or both. All right. So let's get into it. Um, for those of you, especially who have been around since kind of the dawn of the marketing automation platform age, these types of platforms didn't always start out as junk drawers. They started out as really incredibly useful purpose-built systems, and the functionality when they first came on the scene did not exist. Everything was very kind of manual and rudimentary. And this gave marketers a way to execute campaigns, manage emails, manage their landing pages and forms, connect directly to the CRM, and really automate basic flows and follow-up at a time where, like I said before, a lot of this was pretty manual. So it was a major leap forward. And early stage marketing automation platforms were definitely more organized and they were more purpose-built. They were doing the jobs that they were built to do. And, not for nothing, but marketing itself has changed quite a bit over the past 20 years. And the digital complexity of today kind of makes yesterday's ops look a little bit like child's play. So over time, businesses have grown, the go-to-market motion gets more complex, and instead of adding purpose-built systems around the map, what teams started doing was asking their map to take on more jobs. This happens when you have a highly competent, intelligent team who, can figure out how to kind of manipulate technology to do things that it needs to do in order to keep things moving. So now it's not just handling your emails and landing pages. It's not just running your campaigns. It might be doing things like list loading, routing, attribution, segmentation. It might be doing some of your normalization and cleansing. And none of that really sounds unreasonable in isolation. But that's exactly how kind of the mess builds. And eventually, what we get to is the kind of complete junk drawer. Now the map is carrying all kinds of responsibilities from campaign management and nurtures to enrichment, identity resolution, managing buyer groups, UTM mapping. You've got webhooks calling all different technologies, multi-channel orchestration. And it's really kind of stretching the platform kind of to the bounds of what it can handle. And the problem isn't that it just looks messy, it's really creating a lot of operational drag. The more you pile into one system, the harder it becomes to manage and to troubleshoot when something goes wrong. If you need to make an update, you kind of can be a little bit trepidatious about doing it because you don't know if that update here is going to break 5 things downstream that you weren't even aware were running. So it becomes really difficult to scale. Ultimately, your dependencies are buried. So small changes create big downstream risk. And in a lot of cases, the platform is trying to do so much that it's literally slowing itself down. And that's why I'm sure some of you on the call have experienced the queue backlog, and where your sync gets delayed and things aren't firing when they're supposed to fire.
Yeah, and to illustrate that a little bit, we worked with a customer a long time ago that had a very, very large volume of data in their Eloqua instance. And just because of the sheer size of it all and all the processing that was set up in the instance, completely ground to a halt. And the only way they could keep it going was to build a completely custom process that allowed them to create segments in a separate data repository, push them in overnight, use them of course in your marketing automation platform, and then delete them overnight again, just to make sure that there's not that much data in it. I mean that those types of band-aids is what we see all the time, and that's not really what it's meant to be doing.
Yeah, and it's certainly not sustainable, especially as teams kind of change and grow. So, I mean, finally, we find ourselves to today, and this is where AI shows up to the party. And so, everyone's natural reaction is AI is really cool. It's great. Let's add it into the map. Let's start using those AI features in the map. And, it probably has some uplift. Scoring can certainly get a bit more precise. Your segmentation, you're going to be able to pick up edge cases that you weren't before. You're definitely going to be able to kind of lean into personalization features, and some things may actually even get a little bit faster. But the key point here is that when you add AI to a already cluttered architecture, it doesn't fix the architecture. It's basically like tossing a tube of glitter with a loose cap into your junk drawer. And so now everything in the drawer is sparkly and pretty, but it's still junk. You still have to dig through it. You've got tangled cords and your dependencies are all kind of hidden and buried. You're going to have queue issues. And you still have a system that's being asked to do way too many things.
Yeah, and I would argue that the AI functionality that's being released by all the big marketing automation providers is not really going to move the needle. I mean, the features it's being used for to make things a little bit better, like send time optimization, A/B testing, scoring, like you mentioned. It's all really good, and I don't want to say that we shouldn't be using it, but it doesn't quite deliver on the actual big AI promise. To do that, you need something that understands the context of your entire stack.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And so, I mean, the underlying lesson is we're not saying marketing automation platforms are bad and that some of these use cases can't be done or maybe even shouldn't be done in place. But the big thing that we're kind of leaning into is that most companies are using the marketing automation platform as the center of gravity. We're going to use that phrase kind of quite a bit for work that doesn't really belong there. So this is when we kind of reach a point where composability starts to matter and makes sense a lot more.
Perhaps we should take a pause and look a bit about what has actually changed the last few years. When marketing automation started to become a thing a couple of decades ago, it was mostly there to kind of make database marketing a bit more efficient, like blast emailing with a bit of segmentation thrown in. That developed when those platforms became more intelligent and started to pull in more sources of data. They started to include things like behavioral tracking, and they became much more tightly integrated with CRM systems to build out a better customer lifecycle, ROI modeling, etc. In recent years, however, the amount of signals that we're trying to keep track of as marketers has been absolutely exploding, and it's only going faster. So we're talking things like product usage, intent data, AI interactions, community engagement, all kinds of behavioral data, operational data that doesn't really come from the inside those marketing automation systems. And many organizations do try to make it work, and to some degree it works by creating things like custom objects in their CRM systems or their marketing automation systems, just to pull in more data feeds and be able to actually leverage that for their activation. But the challenge isn't that there's just more data, it's that there's more kinds of data, and it's just moving faster and faster across more systems. And they matter to more teams. So you're not just talking about marketing that's relying on it, it's also other teams that want that information. And that creates a real pressure on that old model, because the stack wasn't really originally designed around this many signals flowing through this platform this quickly from this many directions. So you're going to reach a bottleneck. So this is where conceptualizing your technology stack is I think quite important. So there are many ways you can do that. The common one is to look at it like an orbit model. Like, this is something that I've seen quite a lot. I'm sure you have as well. And what it aims to show is that you have a central core. It's usually some combination of a CRM and a marketing automation platform, and then you have that surrounded by other tools, things like webinar platforms, maybe enrichment tools, conversational intelligence, attribution tools, personalization, and so on. What it aims to demonstrate is that the center is relatively static and is your main source of truth, and that the job of the surrounding tools is to feed into it and extend without disrupting the center too much. It's also why those outer orbit tools are relatively easy to swap out. If one isn't working, you just replace it and you just move on, because the center just stays intact. So you're very much relying on that center. There's nothing inherently wrong with this model. In a lot of cases, it makes perfect sense because it's a stable way to run your show. Of course, the reality is that a lot of organizations, they don't live in a stable environment because things are constantly changing, and that's why it makes sense to rethink that to some degree. The issue is that over time, as more signals and workflows pile up in that same single system, the core starts absorbing more and more responsibility, while it's actually lacking the tooling to do this in an automated and easy to maintain and scalable way, because it's not built for it. And then once that happens, what started as a clean way to run your tech stack actually can turn into a real bottleneck to do more interesting things. This is where we talk about the data paradox in the AI landscape. AI makes this problem more urgent, and it makes it more messy. On the one hand, and I'm sure you've all had this realization, AI needs clean and governed connected data. If you want something useful out of it, you need the data to be accurate, it needs to understand the context, obviously it needs to be compliant, it needs to be consistent, you need to be able to relate the data to each other. Otherwise, the intelligence that you get out of it just doesn't work, it's just unreliable. But at the exact same time, AI is also driving more fragmentation. So teams, I mean, I'm sure you have this in your organization as well. They adopt new tools rapidly. They start piloting new things, trying things out, and maybe discarding it again. Um, all of these tools, they generate their own data types, things like summaries, predictions, transcripts created at huge volumes. So AI both increases the need for unified data, but it also increases the number of places that data lives in. And that's the paradox. The path forward is not pretending everything can live in one giant platform. It's moving toward a more federated data model with centralized governance. So the stack can stay flexible, so it keeps you agile without resulting in complete chaos because you want to maintain that level of governance.
Yeah, and I think this hits on the point you made in the previous slide around the idea of interchangeability. And when it comes to data, particularly source data, what worked today may not actually almost surely won't work tomorrow, or maybe it never even worked at all, as we're kind of seeing some of this with a lot of the AI tools and the teams experimenting with them, which is great. I mean, we're going to have to experiment in order to be able to make progress. But having the ability to swap out parts without completely upending the ecosystem is becoming more and more important over time, for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. So that gets us to kind of the main question, and that is, what is composable architecture? I'm sure some of you or many of you on the call have actually some semblance of this already, but let's talk about it, and we'll kind of talk about the strength of what this is achieving. So the simplest way to think about composable architecture is that it's taking one overloaded monolith and it's separating it into purpose-built functions. So instead of asking the map to be the engagement layer, the data layer, do the scoring, the routing, all of the normalization, and now also kind of throw AI into the mix, you start separating the responsibilities out. Let the marketing automation platform do what it was designed to do well. So engagement and activation stay where it belongs in the marketing automation platform. Data orchestration moves into a separate layer that is tailored to do that type of ops data work. So when we say composable, we don't mean a random pile of tools. We mean unbundling one system that has accumulated too many jobs and rebuilding those jobs as sort of modular, more governable functions.
On some level, that unbundling is happening anyway. I mean, we all do it to some degree, right? For the last 10 years or so, sales enablement platforms have become very widespread, and lead management technology has become quite widespread. And it just shows that on some level, this development is happening. Like people do unbundle, and for good reasons, just that they haven't quite conceptualized their tech stack in that way.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, really the kind of core design principle around unbundling, it's all about just decoupling data from engagement. There's kind of a nice clear line in a lot of cases. And a lot of what lives inside the map today really is not about engagement. It actually is data work. It's the pipes and it's the, the electricity of the building. It's not actually the people working and doing things. So matching, cleansing, enrichment, scoring, routing, cleaning data, segmentation, any sort of transformation, a lot of times that's meant to be operational logic. And it ended up inside a lot of marketing automation platforms because frankly, the map was already there and it can facilitate a lot of those things, but it's not because it was really the best place for it. So decoupling the data from engagement means letting the orchestration layer handle all of that data prep. Let it be the place where logic lives. Let it be the place where decisioning lives. And then the engagement layer gets to focus on actually executing across channels. It becomes a lot cleaner and a lot easier to manage. The separation itself does a few very important things. We've mentioned this already a few times. It's going to reduce your operational debt. It's going to make that logic a lot easier to govern. It's going to make changes easier to make in one place because you're not sitting there trying to figure out, okay, this legacy built process that someone did, 3 people ago before me, if I make a change here, is it going to completely break the routing process? So it stops the activation layer from becoming the bottleneck for every workflow in the business.
Yeah, and especially compliance workflows. I mean, it's hard to understand how can people still make it work. I know just using marketing automation platforms, it's almost impossible when you have so many different places where you collect things like opt-ins and so on. Yeah, so why does this matter for AI? So let's look at AI from through a more practical lens. Platform native AI is very limited in what it can see. So if the AI lives inside the marketing automation platform, then it's mostly reasoning over marketing automation visible signals. So things like email engagement and campaign history, maybe things like lead profiles, etc. Some of that might be pulled in from for example, CRMs or other tools, but it's only seeing what it can see within the marketing automation platform, which can be very useful and it's great, but it's constrained, obviously. An orchestrated model is very different because when data orchestration happens outside the marketing automation platform, AI is no longer trapped in this one execution environment. So it can work from CRM context, it can leverage product usage, support signals, warehouse data, marketing engagement, anything. And the list of available context is changing rapidly all the time. It's not static. A composable model acknowledges that constant state of flux. That is the reality of a typical go-to-market stack. We work with a lot of different companies, and I never hear anyone say, we're fairly happy with the way it works and we're planning to leave it for a while to focus on other things. It's just not happening. It's constantly changing. But we need the tooling to orchestrate this across our stack. We need to be able to leverage the power of AI fully. And that means that we can't limit ourselves to just in-platform AI. The real value is that that governed signals become available to any process that needs them. So if you actually want AI workflows or AI agents to be really useful, one of the most important steps is to decide where data orchestration belongs. And I would argue that in most cases, that's not in a single isolated platform that's not really built for it.
Yeah, and it looks like we got a question in, and well, let me read it. And Len, I think I might want to take a stab at this one. So the question is, why not just use Salesforce Data Cloud, Headless 360, and Agentforce for this? Doesn't that solve the same problem, but just inside one ecosystem? Um, so let me take a whack at this because this topic comes up quite frequently for sure. So definitely it can solve part of the problem, and for some organizations it actually might be the right answer. Like if you're heavily standardized in Salesforce and you have really strong internal capability there, most of your data lives there, your activation paths. If all of that is genuinely in that ecosystem, then yeah, a Salesforce centric approach can be a very viable option. But the broader point that we're making is that this isn't just a question of where AI runs, or even just kind of where these workflows are automated. It's really a question of the architecture. And so if you're trying to solve map over centralization by moving that logic and that orchestration and the dependency issues into another core platform, you may see a short-term consolidation bump, but you haven't actually improved the situation. You haven't solved the issue of the division of labor. And I'm sure many of you on the call today know Salesforce can become a bottleneck too.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's another issue that I think it's worth talking about, which is visibility and execution. And this kind of piggybacks on what Len was just talking about. Native AI functionality, like he said, is constrained by what the platform can see and what it can access. And so in order for it to be effective, you're going to start feeling pressure to bring more and more data into that system so that the AI can actually have enough context to make those decisions. And that can really create a big headache. It's going to involve more synchronization. It could create duplication of data. Governance becomes more complicated. It's not ideal. And so Agent Force may certainly be part of the answer, but I actually think it's a mistake to assume that it should be the place where all orchestration lives in most cases. So when you think about agents, you have to remember they're meant to call APIs. Agents use tools to achieve actions. So the best pattern isn't usually put everything inside Salesforce. It's let the agent trigger work across systems and let the orchestration layer handle sort of the more complicated logic. So long story short, it's not that Salesforce AI is weak, it's awesome. But you want to make sure that you're not making Salesforce the only place where every single workflow and dependency, you don't want to cause the same problem in Salesforce that you already have in your marketing automation platform.
I agree. So where does composability make the most sense? What type of organization are we talking about? The short answer is not everywhere and not all at once. It really depends on how technically mature your organization is. So I'm talking about the skills within your team and also how important it actually is to your line of business. And that really depends on what your go-to-market model is. So if you look at this diagram, you'll see on one axis the need for technical agility. And on the other hand, you've got the engineering and technical capability inside the organization. And what this shows is that different companies land in very different places. For example, if you're a traditional enterprise where most of your sales motion is still non-digital or a significant portion of that, you may not need much beyond a cleaner core stack. The need for agility is simply not a thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're a fast growing company with a small ops team or a product led business with a lot of behavioral signals, then the pressure for having being more agile starts to rise. And if you're in a scale up environment or more digitally sophisticated environment, the case for a composable model gets stronger because the volume of signals, logic, cross system coordination starts to outgrow that monolith model. So it's not a simple question of yes or no. It requires everyone to do an honest self-assessment to decide what your needs are and what your capabilities are. We need to acknowledge that there is a level of complexity that you need to manage when you go down this route. And it might mean that's a trade-off that's not worth making. But if the complexity is a given, if you are already living it every day, then conceptualizing it in this way and try to make sense of it in this way might actually be the right approach.
Yeah, and so to help you kind of figure out whether or not this is for you or if you're reaching a point where you need to start considering composability, we came up with a little bit of a readiness checklist. And this checklist is not meant to be a very precise scorecard, but it is a quick way to tell whether your marketing automation problem is still mostly operational or whether it's actually starting to become an architectural problem. And that's the point where you really need to start thinking about breaking things out. So what you're really looking for here is a pattern. If you're only seeing one or two of these signals, that usually means that you have room to optimize the marketing automation platform that you already have. So take some time, clean it up, tighten up your governance, simplify, get rid of things, delete, archive, whatever you have to do, and keep going. Don't waste your time over architecting something that doesn't need to be over architected. If you're seeing three or four, that's usually where the conversation starts to get a little bit more interesting. It's often the inflection point where a hybrid model starts to make sense. And we'll talk about the two different models here in a minute. Because now you're not just dealing with clutter. That clutter is creating actual strain on your platforms and on your processes. And there's actual pain being experienced within the organization because of what's going on. So the platform is carrying responsibilities that it might not be the best place to own anymore. And if you're seeing five or six of these signals, that is a pretty strong indication that your operational debt is really turning into an architectural problem. And this is the point where the question is less, how do we clean this up and organize our Marketo better? It's really more about how do we redistribute the responsibilities across our stack intentionally. And the goal, of course, is to enable the tech you have, not just to kind of squeeze everything to within an inch of its life, which I know, in today's economy is hard. We're all kind of being asked to do more with less. So really this slide is just meant to help you distinguish between three states. It's really we need to optimize, or we should start to externalize certain processes selectively, or we really need to think about overhauling our data ops model. Okay, so now we've gotten kind of through talking about what is composability, why are we here, what problems are we trying to solve? And we're actually going to talk about the kind of two core models that we look at when we talk about a composable stack. So there really are two broad ways to modernize. The first is a hybrid model. And to be quite honest, the hybrid model is probably going to apply to the vast majority of people. We already see a lot of our own customers doing this today. Len, I know your team helps a lot of your clients kind of compose some of these types of things. So in the hybrid model, you keep the map for what it's good at. Like we talked about earlier, it's the engagement and it's the activation layer, but you are moving the data operations and the orchestration into a separate layer. The second model is the full composable model. And just to be very upfront, this model really is not for everybody. It takes a very high degree of sophistication to achieve a fully composable architecture. We'll show you an example of what one looks like. But the idea there is that the marketing automation platform is no longer the center of gravity. It's gone. And all the responsibilities that once existed in the marketing automation platform are distributed across different purpose-built systems. So most teams, like I said, are never going to seek that full composable end state. The ones that do have a complex, sophisticated architecture, and they are very constrained already by the native functionality in some of the platforms that they have. For a lot of organizations, that hybrid model is the practical move. And it's going to really kind of help transform your data operations and the ability for your ops ecosystem to function well.
Yeah, and I think that that hybrid model is what people, or at least slightly more complex organizations, are already living in. They might not conceptualize it that way, but that is technically where they are.
Mhm.
So this is a visualization of such a hybrid model. This is what we come across very often. It's probably something that you're probably somewhat familiar with. And instead of one giant center of gravity, you start to sort of federate responsibilities. And this is really built around certain domains. So you've got like CRM, you have marketing automation for marketing, product for product support, for customer services, partner systems. All of those domains, they still exist within their own lanes, but there's now a data orchestration layer in the middle that helps coordinate all these different signals and logics and handoffs. So you replace that black hole with a central nervous system that's adaptable and flexible. So if you want to swap out one of those different systems for another, or if you want to adapt something, on a particular data point, then you can do that in a central place. You're not reliant on having to update it separately in many different systems. So the point here is not that it's full decentralization. You're not trying to create chaos with more tools. You're trying to create a governed coordination layer that reduces over centralization and duplication of data without losing control. So this is why I think that hybrid is such an important option. It gives you a step towards more modularity without requiring a full rip and replace motion. I think we're living in a world where the entire business to some degree gets pulled in to the go-to-market motion. Like product is much more tightly integrated with how you go to market now than it was 20 years ago. So and people do recognize this is nothing new, and I think especially when you know that and when you want to do that in a way that actually builds a meaningful customer lifecycle, then this type of model is probably the one that you want to go for.
Yeah, definitely. And up until now, when we've talked about orchestration, we've talked about it fairly generically. Orchestration can be a number of things. It can be achieved with workflows, to some degree in Salesforce. It can be custom code, but it also can be through tools like Openprise, which is my platform. And we are a no-code automation platform where a lot of the processes that we've been talking about can be built directly into this platform. And it is a very neutral layer. It connects to a lot of different systems. It can run a lot of different processes subsequently, but still kind of, oversee the whole thing. And so what I have for you up on screen is actually a real world example of one of my customers personally, who did approach a fully composable uh, architecture, really. And so this team was planning for a much fuller unbundling, and it was driven by the fact that they had actually already replaced core components of their marketing automation platform, such as forms and email sends, which is kind of unusual, but essentially what had happened is they were already using other tools to um, do email for them, and they were using external forms and whatnot. And so because they were already using Openprise to handle a lot of their operational data management, they kind of had this realization of like, do we actually need our marketing automation platform at all anymore? Can we just kind of get rid of that line item? And, we've already moved in this direction elsewhere. So I do just want to make clear this type of project wasn't just driven from the fact of someone saying, well, what if we just blow it all up? And we start to buy a million different tools that can kind of piece together what a marketing automation platform ultimately did. So I don't want to kind of give anybody a false promise here if that's how you should approach it. But what is useful here is that it shows that this is not a one-for-one replacement exercise. They weren't asking what single tool can replace our map. It was essentially redistributing the responsibilities across a bunch of other tools and functions. So before they had one legacy marketing automation platform, and that was acting as everything. It was the operating system, it was campaigns, it was a system of record. And now those jobs are intentionally split across a very modular stack. Forms went one way, emails another. You can see landing pages, asset management. It all kind of moved around. And they're basically using Openprise now to orchestrate all those different layers and make sure that their systems of record, their Salesforce, their data lakes, are able to kind of see and interact together with, a very nice kind of coordinated set of data. So one other thing on this slide that's really important to mention if you're approaching true composability, if this is something that you're really thinking about doing, they staged the transition. You can't just go in and, toss a bomb and then kind of hope everything is going to settle in the right place. They really kind of structured a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Here's how we're going to do this. And this matters because when the vision is full composable, the execution on it needs to be done intelligently. So I think this is a great example of what full composability can look like. It is not just one big instant replacement project. It is redistribution, and there is a lot of variation available to teams between keeping your map versus doing what this customer did and just getting rid of it. So, like Len said, I think there's the vast majority of teams are going to fall into this hybrid space, but just knowing what one end looks like and the other end looks like can give you a little bit of inspiration.
Up until this point, we've talked a bit about where the strain comes from and what composable actually means, where it tends to fit well. This is the part what most people actually want to know. Like, how do you actually make that move? Most people do not start by replacing their marketing automation platform, which might be the end result, but they start by reducing what that marketing automation platform is actually responsible for. So phase one is that data sidecar. It's actually the best place to begin because it basically draws on the question, where can you remove the messiest, most operationally painful work without changing the end user experience too much. So things like workflows for deduplication, enrichment from third parties, all of that type of stuff. That hygiene work that tends to create a lot of hidden drag inside your marketing automation platform. So, both from a maintenance perspective, all of these rules that are set up, they need to be maintained. They'll constantly change, in my experience. But also just the actual processing that can take a lot of time. So there can be time lag in that as well. Marketing automation platforms their tooling tends not to be that good, in my experience, to do that in a scalable and easy to maintain way. So moving it outside of that platform that gives you immediate relief and improves the quality of what goes downstream. Phase two is externalizing the brain. This is where you move from a tool-defined logic to more governed logic. Things like audience membership, scoring, so qualification rules. So things like measuring propensity, maybe customer lifecycle decisions. Instead of rebuilding those rules separately inside each tool, you start calculating them in one orchestration layer and passing governed output downstream. And this is where agility really starts to improve, because you can change logic once and then have it propagate across the stack. And then there is a temptation to say, well, we can just do it in Salesforce, but that creates the same problem in a different place. And Alyssa already mentioned this. The goal is not to crown a new monolith, like to have a new center of gravity. The goal is really to put orchestration in a layer that's actually built for orchestration. It does not have to mean that one specific vendor or one specific implementation path. The principle is simply that orchestration should live in neutral territory, and not get buried inside whichever major platform happens to be closest. And then phase three is right size activation. So once hygiene and logic are no longer trapped inside the marketing automation platform, you can make much cleaner decisions about what the map should actually do going forward. So maybe you keep it just as a leaner sender. Maybe you downgrade tiers, to save money or whatever. And maybe you move to a more focused point solution. But by that point, you're finally making an activation decision instead of asking one system to also be your data pipeline and also your logic engine and a workaround factory. If you need help to figure this out and what that transition could work, how that could work, just get in touch with us. We're happy to help.
Yeah, and Len, we actually had a question come in that I think kind of fits in with the last two slides. So the question was, how do you start doing this without breaking your campaign execution or attribution or compliance in the process?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think no one these days has time for a 12-month project to kind of replace all of this. So that makes complete sense. Fundamentally, it means that you need to phase these things. So you're not trying to transform the entire stack in one go. So just focus on the easy things, but that do take a lot of work to maintain. So things like data deduplication, enrichment, you can pull that into one system, and that's why we talked about that sidecar phase first. It reduces the operational strain without immediately disrupting the end user experience. Sales teams don't even notice that what's actually changed on your side. They might see a quality improvement because the maintenance is easier, but fundamentally what they're getting from you hasn't really changed. And then as you start externalizing more of that logic, you can make sure that the outputs are simple and explicit. Things like audience management, owner assignment, all of that stuff. Ultimately, you kind of want to phase that whole approach. It's not like you want to do everything in one go. It's just you need to make sure that you can walk before you start running. And then one big thing that I think is really important is the governance aspect of this. So you don't want everyone to try to maintain this brain, if you like. You need to make sure that there's rules in how you actually maintain those systems, all of those governance rules, especially if you're dealing with something that actually feeds into a lot of downstream systems that can get very, very messy very quickly. So you need to know what you're doing. So you need to have a good process for maintaining that, and that means that you need to have the skills in-house to actually understand that architecture to get it right. But anyway, the short answer is to phase that whole process and apply good governance to it and start with work that gives you the most value quickest, and then build on top of that.
And I'll just add one thing. I think, approaching these types of transformation, it can be challenging, and a lot of organizations don't necessarily have the full amount of talent required to do this. And this is actually where employing an agency like CRMT is critical. Because not only do they actually know how to architect this, there's also that kind of political element. You are going to butt heads between sales and marketing and IT and potentially product. And when you have an agency who can kind of sit in the middle and translate and moderate, it can be very helpful, and it can help things stay on track. And it can make sure that you sort of have a neutral voice saying, no, this is who should own this. This is how this decision should be handled, instead of everyone kind of trying to jockey for position. So I just wanted to call that out. If you really want to undergo a successful transformation, I'm a little biased. I used to work for an agency, but I think they play a very valuable role in achieving this type of thing.
I agree, of course.
All right, so let's round things out. We've only got a couple more slides just to kind of close up. So really quickly, we just want to talk about, how do we keep a composable stack stable? What provides stability, and then what are some of the pitfalls? So a composable architecture only works when the operating model around it is stable. That's a really important thing to understand. You can't just tool your way into something that works better. It has to be done intelligently. So the stability comes down to four things: governance, truth, ownership, and activation discipline. You need to have centralized consent and suppression, so every tool knows who's eligible to be contacted. You need shared measurement and a source of truth for the schema. That way, the map, the CRM, the warehouse, they're not all telling different stories, which I know is something a lot of teams experience today. You need clear ownership, like Len mentioned, so that people know who owns the pipeline, who owns the campaign, who owns the fix. That way, it's not a million people trying to control the brain. You kind of know, the one person to go to, or the one team to go to deal with the problem. And you also need a disciplined activation approach, so that downstream tools consume those governed outputs instead of sort of running their own conflicting logic. If those things are missing, you will start to see some of the pitfalls show up. So costs are certainly going to rise. Complexity tends to go up. Fragmentation will probably get worse. And the organization will end up carrying more operational burden than it is ready for. So again, we don't solve this problem by just breaking things apart and hoping everything will function. You still need a plan, and you still need a little bit of operational rigor to make sure that this all works. So composability, it's not just a technical pattern. It is very much a governance and an operating model decision that you will make in your organization.
So why are teams even doing this if it's so hard? Well, it shouldn't be hard, but there's a couple of reasons why it could be a really good option. So one is that it can increase your innovation speed. You're not waiting on one vendor roadmap or one giant system to evolve into the direction that you want. It gives you more best of breed freedom. It gives you more independence. You can choose the right tool for the right function instead of forcing one platform to do everything. It reduces vendor lock-in, which gives you flexibility and leverage with those vendors, right? If you need to negotiate with them. It supports stronger domain ownership, so teams can own their own workflows while still aligning to a shared governance. It scales more cleanly by design because capabilities can expand horizontally instead of everything being forced through one center. And importantly, it puts you in a better position of what comes next, because we are in a world where that changes very, very fast. So new data types, new channels, new expectations from AI, new motions for your go-to-market model. It's not about being modular for its own sake. The point is to build a stack that can adapt, and that is what composable could do for you.
I think you summed that up really well, Len. I definitely think that composability is becoming more and more important as we, forge ahead in the age of AI. And so it is going to be important to kind of really look at your stack, figure out where things can and should be done, and consider moving things around to kind of better enable everything. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. We do have a little bit of time for questions, and I think we have two. The first one is pretty succinct. Len, maybe this one's for you. The question is just, is this a good way to save money?
The money question,
Yeah.
yeah. I I don't. think that's a good reason to do it. In some cases, if you think about it really hard, you might be able to save money because you might be less reliant on some of the big vendors. It gives you maybe strategically a bit of an edge when you're negotiating deals with some of those big platforms. So in that sense, it could help you. But the reality is that a lot of those big vendors, they also throw in all kinds of functionality that could do some of these things as well. So you might make a choice not to go with what you consider best of breed, but you go with what's actually in the platform, and that could be a lot cheaper. So my point is, I guess it could potentially, but it probably won't. And I definitely think that because there's a level of complexity with it as well, you need to be very careful thinking about it as a cost-saving exercise, because I think that's not the right reason to do this. There's a lot of good reasons to do it strategically. Your independence increases, so you can make easier decisions around swapping out tools. All of that is really important, and there's a monetary aspect to that. But fundamentally, is that a good reason to go to this model? Personally, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think I agree. And then we have, looks like one more question. I think this one came in a little bit earlier. The question is, how do we know whether we actually have an architectural problem versus just a messy marketing automation platform that needs cleanup? Um, I can take this one. This touches on, I think, some of the stuff that we spoke to earlier in the presentation. And honestly, so that is the right first question, because like we said, not every single messy marketing automation platform is an architectural problem. It's things got a little bit messy. It doesn't mean just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if the issue is mainly about administrative hygiene, you've got unused campaigns, you've got kind of old fields, you've got clutter, inconsistent naming conventions, then that is a cleanup exercise. You do not need composability for that. Clean house, see if you can get it functional, and like we said earlier, move on. It starts becoming architectural when the pain is really felt structurally. And this is when you have key workflows, things like lead routing, that are buried in the map because originally there was nowhere else it made sense to put them. And now you have a situation where you've got legacy workflows, you have dependencies, so all sorts of workflows stacked on one another. Things are kind of triggering all willy-nilly. And changes are actually really risky in this type of environment because there's really nobody who can accurately trace the different dependencies. And
Mhm.
so if your customer truth is living in somewhere like a warehouse or a CRM, but you have identity workflows or routing logic spanning multiple systems, sometimes in competition with each other, you're going to start to see a lot of chaos. And this usually shows up in the form of like angry salespeople. So,
Or worse, angry customers.
or worse, angry customers. So if you're kind of trying to stuff everything all in one place, because again, it's you have the tool and you're not going to have to spend more money if you just keep piling into whatever tool you're using. There are going to be consequences for that. So the test in my mind is really, are you dealing with just stock standard platform mess, or are you dealing with misplaced responsibilities? Should this thing, well, not even should it be doing it, but is it the best place for this type of operational flow to work? Um, Always, this is something that we kind of do with our customers. You always say optimize first and then kind of take on the sort of more bigger transformative processes after. Let me just check the chat. I think that's it for questions. And we are almost at the top of the hour. So, Len, I'd just like to thank you for joining me in this discussion. It was certainly a fun topic to explore. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. And if you're thinking about your own transformation, get in touch with Len. Their team can definitely help you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right, well, that concludes our event today. This will be available on demand for all of you as well. It'll be posted on our Openprise website under the Knowledge Center, as well as it will be sent out over email. And our next webinar most likely will be in June, so we look forward to seeing you guys there. Thank you all for your time.
Thank
Thank you.
you.